Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's TAFE Talks. I'm Jenny Dodd. I'm the CEO of TAFE Directors Australia. In the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first people of the lands we are all meeting on today. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I extend those respects to emerging leaders. Welcome to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in today's webinar. Welcome also to TDA board members and TDA CEOs and all TAFE people participating today. Today, it gives me great pleasure to announce a new TDA corporate affiliate, D2L. D2L is a global learning innovation company helping organisations shape the future of education and work. For some of you, you'll know them as your learning management LMS provider. D2L is driven by a belief that everyone deserves access to high quality education, regardless of ability or education. This is summarised through their very powerful purpose statement, transforming the way the world learns. Corporate affiliates are vital for the delivery of services by TDA to our education community. Without the support of our corporate affiliates, TAFE Talk sessions like today would most likely need to become fee-paying. So we are delighted that our corporate affiliates are supporting our mission in TDA to lead thoughtful and valuable conversations about the future of learning, skills, and work. While also, and part of what we'll do today, showcasing the quality leadership of our TDA members through these TAFE Talk sessions. So thank you to D2L's Tony Maguire, Regional Director, Australia and New Zealand, and Stephen Atherton, Senior Education Account Executive for Australia and New Zealand, for being part of today's session. I'll introduce you properly before the panel sessions. Today's TAFE Talks was the first time that we've had to close registrations to an event because we had reached our maximum capacity. What that shows is the importance those in our sector are placing on the development of microcredentials. There is a great desire to step into this discussion. We've extended the time, as you know, today, and we've packed a lot into this hour and a half. But we see it as only the first of many discussions. Later this year, we will be holding a TDA convention, and we anticipate that microcredentials will be a significant theme of that convention. To lead the discussion today, we are very pleased to have three terrific presentations. We'll begin with Beverly Oliver, who's Emeritus Professor and Principal Consultant at EduBrief. Beverly will be followed by TAFE New South Wales with practical insight into their developments of microcredentials. And they will be leading that discussion will be Dr. Margot McNeil, Chief Product Quality Officer, and Dr. Suniti Rakari, Director of Product Operations and Performance. Following TAFE New South Wales, TAFE Queensland's Chief Academic Officer, Joanne Pine, and Director Product Agency, Tracy Singh, will further explore this important area of microcredentials by outlining the significant work TAFE Queensland has been leading. Then we'll have time for some questions. Our focus will then turn to some reflections and insights from Tony Maguire and Stephen Atherton from D2L on what they've heard and their thoughts on these developments. We'll then have time for a few more questions, and then I'll conclude with the final summary. In terms of your questions, they will not be live. You need to use the Q&A section. The panelists all have access to the Q&A and they can put in a response. If you use the chat, which you're welcome to, the TDA staff, and I want to thank them. I want to thank Lyndall and Melinda for helping pull together today's webinar. We'll be monitoring the chat and they will move anything that is a significant question across into the Q&A. So let's get going. I'd like to firstly introduce Beverly Oliver, our opening speaker. Beverly is an Australian National Teaching Fellow. She's a Principal Fellow of HEA and she's a qualified company director. Her recent experience includes Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education at Deakin University, Deputy Chair of Universities Australia's Deputy Vice-Chancellor's Academic Group, and Deputy Chair of EduGrowth, a not-for-profit Australian acceleration network for high-growth, scalable, borderless education. Beverly now works as a higher education consultant and continues to research, publish, and present on topics such as digital education, micro-credentials, curriculum transformation, quality assurance, and graduate employability. When I joined TDA in September last year, I had the great pleasure of meeting Beverly and being part of quite a large consultation group that she was chairing on the proposed micro-credential marketplace. Her deep knowledge and wonderful leadership were very evidenced. We are privileged to have Beverly join us today. Thank you, Beverly.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm just going to start my slides and we should be live. I hope that's fine. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you happen to be on the other side of the country, where I originally came from, Western Australia. It's a great honour to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. I thought today, given that I'll be speaking for about 20 minutes, I might just try and harvest some of my top line thinking about micro-credentials across the lifespan, not necessarily just for TAFE learners, but for everyone really, and suggest what I've called some conversation starters. So I'm going to give you a little introduction to me, and then I'm going to share with you about 6 points that I've come to think about during my experience with micro-credentials. So I hope that's helpful. And I've asked Jenny to interrupt me and ask a question or make this as conversational as you like. So about my journey with micro-credentials and how much I'm yet to learn, because this is a really rapidly moving field, and it's fair to say one where there's quite a bit of hype. And it's also been questioned whether the hype actually ever lives up to whether micro-credentials in fact will live up to the hype. We'll see. A little bit about me. I would describe myself as a lifelong learner, and I spent the first half of my career in secondary education in the regions in WA and in the city. And then I moved to higher education, and I ended up moving into the teaching side, into a leadership position, and into research and policy, particularly around the micro-credential space as well. So I've worked in WA, I've worked in Victoria, but I've also had, as Jenny mentioned, some roles nationally and done some international work as well. So in the last 3 or 4 years particularly, that really has focused on micro-credentials, but it's also connected to graduate employability, or employability in a general sense. The other thing I'd like to share with you, though, is my lack of experience. And I do want to put to you that I'm the person in the room today least experienced in TAFE talk, and vocational education is the sector that I have had least to do with, I'm sorry to say, and I wish I had more to do with it. I have worked with TAFE providers, but more to do with their higher education offerings. So I know a little bit about it, but not as much as you do. Even so, I'm going to present to you a fairly global picture, and I hope a focus on the lifespan. Just very quickly, and I will give you these slides. You'll be very welcome to use anything that's referenced here. And anything I mention that I've written myself is available on a link in the slide deck. So this was the report that went out a few years ago, Making Micro-Credentials Work. And then I provided, based on that, some advice to the Qualifications Framework Review. And there is that definition that was put there, and has actually, it's not perfect. I know there's a lot of discussion about it, and it might not suit all sectors, and certainly I'll talk about that in a minute. However, this is the one that seems to have gathered a reasonable amount of acceptance in our country, not so much other countries. And I'll mention that just now too, and that's a piece of work I did last year for UNESCO. Again, it was a conversation starter, but I worked with some 50 experts from around the world, which took me well beyond my higher education bubble. I'll come back to bubbles in a minute, because I think we're all in a bit of a bubble. But I was working with experts from qualifications authorities, higher ed, vet, continuing professional development, international and regional organisations. It was fascinating work. And we were trying to come up with a universal definition, what we could agree on, what do we mean by a micro-credential? And I will mention this again when I get to my 6 points. So we tried to come up with a definition, and what I learned from that is, in fact, we all speak such a different language in education, even though I've spent my life in education, and I'm sure many of you have. When we change region, state, sector, I mean, look at us in Australia, we even struggle to find the words to speak across the sectors between vocational and higher education. And I do recognise, of course, that many TAFEs do provide higher education as well as vocational education. Anyway, that was a really interesting thought, certainly an interesting experience. And this is what I mean by we're in a bubble. So I invite you to reflect on this before I go on to my 6 points. I think our views about micro-credentials are strongly influenced by and often limited to our own experience of life-wide and lifelong learning. So it depends on your own education, your own working life, the region with its own language. And sometimes we assume, because people come from different sectors to us, that they don't understand what we're talking about in our sector and micro-credentials or other things. So my, I guess, reflection on this is that regardless, we should really start with the learner. And I want to talk about this a bit more in a minute. Start with the learner, whoever the learner happens to be and wherever they happen to be on their life journey. Find out who they really are and what they want to achieve. And I'll go on to say, what is the value they're looking for, and therefore, how might a micro-credential help them? I'll come back to that, but I hope that's helpful. So here's 6 of my suggestions. First of all, I suggest if you're interested in moving into, or you're already well on the way to micro-credentialing, I think it's really important to understand the crucial difference between learning and credentialed learning. And I hope this illustration might help. Let's take this as the learning ecosystem. Here is all the learning we do across our lifespan. So that's a lifespan learner, if you like. And personal interest learning is something that you and I now do, I'm sure, all the time. I learn when I look at Twitter. I learn when I read the press. I read all sorts of things. I'm always learning, and I'm sure you are too. And there is a place for learning that's not credentialed. I did want to share with you that when I was teaching in a secondary school in Geraldton in Western Australia, I was working all the hours God gave me at that time. And a colleague of mine and I decided that just to have a break, on a Tuesday night, we would go down to Geraldton TAFE and we'd actually sign up for some community learning, I'd call it. But, you know, we decided we'd learn something we knew nothing about. So we picked economics because that was all new to me at that time. And then I went and did a computer course. We were not assessed. It was simply a break. And you might say, well, it wasn't much of a break if you were teaching all day, but it was really. It was a chance for me to learn something, to refresh my brain and so on. So there's a tremendous place for this. And I would urge you, if you're a provider, not to abandon that place. It can, of course, have financial returns. It's not probably very high, but it doesn't matter. It's part of our, I think, DNA as educators. But today I want to focus more on the world of credentialed learning. And this is where the business of higher education, the business of vocational education, and the business of school and K-12 and so on really works. Because, as we know, most of the what I'll call macro qualifications that we all know and love, K-12 and usually some sort of certificate or diploma to end secondary school education, then a TAFE qualification, a vocational qualification, or a degree qualification, whatever. This is all really done at the front end of life. And that's where the macro credentials are. And they're, of course, big business. They're rivers of gold, if I can call it that way, because many for example, in tertiary education, they're accompanied by some kind of government funding and so on. So that has been the core business of providers. But now we're in this space where the whole opportunity is opening up more to do what we call micro certification, if you like, or micro credentials. The difference is, of course, and this is for me is a real conviction, and I think most people have probably agree with this, that this is about certified learning that's been assessed. It's been verified, it's been qualified. You've had to demonstrate that you've done something, which is not what I was doing back in Geraldton. Micro-credentials are generally regarded as cheaper, faster, and more skill-focused. Something I learned while I was doing the UNESCO work. The micro is as much, not so much about the size and length of the course that you might be having, but it's actually about the focus on a skill. It's a micro focus on a skill rather than necessarily a macro focus. Sometimes these micro-credentials, like macro-credentials, can interact with others. They can pathway into, alongside, and outside. And I would put to you that the idea of them and convincing people to do them has to be put as a channel towards something better. I tend to think of them as for thriving or surviving. You can do a micro-credential so that you have a better life. During the pandemic, the first year of the pandemic, the highest enrolling MOOCs, which are micro-credentials, if you want to call them that, were in mental health, COVID information, resilience, and all those sorts of things. However, most of them probably these days are related to working well, surviving, if you like. And this is what I mean. It's related to earning a living. So if you're going to play in this space, I think it's really important that you decide what it is you want to achieve, where you want to play and why, and then measure your success as a provider accordingly. So that's my first reflection. I'm just going to keep going and I'll go a bit more quickly on these. Secondly, I think it's really important, if you set yourself up to provide any credential, let me focus on micro-credentials for a minute, is that you understand the learner, where they are in their life at the moment, and the value they're seeking at this stage. I've written something on this. You're very welcome to have a look at it. It's really 1,000 words. It's a small provocation. It's about a learner value framework for micro-credentials, and it's based on what you see on the screen, that depending on the learner's circumstances, and that takes quite a bit of working out, who are these people, what is their capacity to learn, their capacity to pay, and so on, what is the value they are seeking? And I posit that good value, when you do a credential, good value means the benefits, whatever they happen to be, it's not just job, but there are many, actually meet or outweigh the costs, preferably outweigh. And if we reflect on any credential as poor value, then the benefits are outweighed by the costs. Importantly, I think there are two main costs that we need to think about, particularly with older learners. I'm talking about learners beyond high school. And that is, it's about money, it's about fees, but it's also about time. And there are many ways of calibrating time and helping people to invest their time in a more useful way. So that might be helpful to you. But my suggestion would be, if you're going to go down this route, maximize the benefits most valued by your targeted learner and moderate those costs or investments of time and money as much as you can, because then you'll heighten the value. I hope that's helpful. I think we should agree on the principles that we agree on. Now, when we tried to do the UNESCO work, this is what we came up with. I'm not going to go through it. You can see there are certain words in red. This is what we agreed on with the 50 international experts. The Australian definition is a bit different. The point I wanted to make on this one is there are a gazillion definitions of micro-credentials, but the underlying things that we commonly all agree on, and Jenny referenced the working group that she and I were on last year. I think the important things we're clear on, and most people seem to agree most of the time, that good practice in micro-credentials, quality micro-credentials, are going to be around verified and verifiable learning, quality assessment and feedback, and outcomes. And so if you're wondering if you as a provider should venture into this, I would say these are the things you're good at. As a tertiary educator, you're very good at verified learning, you know how to do assessment, and you know how to do outcomes. In other words, not just learning outcomes, but actually whatever the outcomes are, let's say graduate outcomes, that the learners are seeking. So rather than worry too much about any particular definition, I think we've got the main threads and we agree on them, and we should move forward nationally as a country as well. If you're going to partner with industry, and I know this is a really great opportunity to do so, then I think you should think as creatively as possible. I think you should think about, if you're a provider, putting industry first and you take the back seat, even if you just think about it before you act that way. The reason I say this is because I come out of the last 20 years in higher education, and it's a notoriously supply-driven education provider. Universities typically, well, it's my experience anyway, the ones I've worked with, we typically think up what we can put out to the market and then try and sell it, rather than necessarily thinking, what do people need? What are they looking for? And how can we help them get there? So with industry, do the things we are good at as educators and providers, and we are really good at a lot of things. And I would put to you, one of the things we underestimate ourselves on, that industry is not really very good at necessarily in the education space, is quality assurance. And I'll just reiterate what I said there. Educational or academic quality assurance is something that traditional providers are very good at, which industry doesn't necessarily have a history of doing. So that's a thing that we could be good at and bring to the partnership. Also, think about the fact that you don't necessarily have to provide the whole micro-credential yourself. Just by way of reiterating this, I wanted to show you this quick table. It's a couple of years old, but it's some work I looked at on the FutureLearn platform a couple of years ago. Now, FutureLearn is the UK-based MOOC platform that offers all sorts of short courses. They call them micro-credentials now. Great. On this table, you can see in the orange lines, certain courses were offered by FutureLearn in collaboration with Amazon Web Services, Salesforce, Tableau. You see the idea. Now, over to the right, you can see that Coventry and Glasgow Caledonian universities were not involved at all in actually providing the micro-credential. However, they lent their name to it, they lent their reputation to it by validating it and providing credit towards one of their qualifications. So there are many ways of doing partnership, is where I'm trying to go with this. Think really broadly about how you can do it. Because what we don't need is a provider to do all the work and then just get a badge on something from an industry provider. And that's, I think industry's got a lot more to provide, a lot more to offer than that. The fifth one is something I feel pretty strongly about. Look, there are hundreds and thousands of micro-credentials available online, absolutely online. We have no idea how many Australian citizens, for example, have signed up to do courses on any given topic in platforms housed in America, in the UK, in Europe, anywhere in the world. There are many of them and they are very inexpensive. I'll give you one example in a minute. The trouble is that micro-credentials are a data-free zone. Because they're all commercial in confidence, we usually have no idea how many people sign up to these things, although I will share with you that many people who provide them within this country often quietly let me know that they're having trouble getting people to sign up. Users are not entirely convinced yet that they are worth the investment of time and money. So what I would put to you is, if you're going to go into micro-credentials, don't necessarily just keep putting up more short courses that can keep competing in the same space, but show me where this micro-credential will lead me. Then back it up with real evidence that learners like me will achieve those goals. Stop promising me that if I do this course, I'm going to get this job. Show me the evidence that people like me actually get that job. I think we need to move on from simply putting things out there. Show me a path, show me a map, and give me the evidence to show me this works. I would throw out a question as well. Is labour market literacy, especially post-COVID, an essential life skill? It probably always was. What I mean by this is, it worries me that I worked for a long time in a university and thought so little, I thought so little about making sure students understood the Australian labour market, that there are 19 industries, that some of them are growing, some of them are very small. And if they if the students concentrated and graduated in certain areas, how did we educate them to work across those industries? For example, as an accountant, they could not just work in business, but right across the industries. So that's something I've thought more about more recently. And how do we build this kind of thing into making sure, and I'll say it later, that the micro-credential or any kind of credential is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. Most people are paying money and investing time in order to get somewhere or to go somewhere in their life. How do we help them get there rather than just get the credential? So I promised an example, and here it is. And again, this is on, I'm sorry, I went too fast. This is on the resources that I mentioned. You can have a look at this. I wrote a report a couple of years ago on Coursera professional certificates. I went through and examined them. The point of the table I'm showing you is you can see there are 23 courses there, and they've got columns next to them. And the first two columns are around the learner investment. How many hours should a learner use, and what's the likely fee? Now, that's normally what we all tell students when we try to sell them any kind of course. That's normal. But what Coursera is doing, and trust me, I don't think they're always really good at this, and I don't think they're a shining example, but at least they're trying. When you go to sign up for one of these courses at Coursera, Coursera also shows you, the prospective learner, what the overall rating so far is by previous learners. Now, it's a 5-star scale, and we all know we could drive a truck through those, but at least they put them up there. Every university I worked for always had student evaluations. We didn't always highlight what past students said about a particular course. It also shows you on Coursera's website how many people have already signed up. We also know many people have signed up and left, but the point is, you're trying to show you how popular or not this is. Most importantly, and I thought this had some merit, albeit it could be done a lot more robustly, and that is, they asked learners what benefits, previous learners who'd finished, what benefit did you get from this course? Did it help you start a new career? Did it help you get an increase in pay or promotion? And those are the percentages they gave. Now, they don't tell us response rates and all those things. As I said, it's not perfect. But I would dearly love to see a provider have the courage to tell us this is what happened in our courses. Of course, we do get that in higher education, but it comes a couple of years after the event, as we know. But I just leave that with you, that I think that's somewhere we could be far more ambitious about and more transparent with our learners. My last thought, credential provider, credential thyself. We're all very aware that in the last couple of years in the pandemic, there's been an awful lot of churn in the tertiary education sector, particularly in universities, I know, I presume also to some extent in TAFE. I wonder if we keep saying micro-credentials is such a great idea for everyone else's industry, why aren't we micro-credentialing our own staff? Particularly when people are leaving and moving and there's all this churn and corporate memories going, it might be very important to help our own staff be more credentialed and have portable and quantifiable evidence of their professional expertise in TAFE or in higher education, whatever it is, because that actually shores up the sector so that we can find our new hires and look after our staff in a better way. So I'm interested in the fact that we're often saying other industries should be providing micro-credentials or macro-credentials. How about us as an industry? Just my thoughts. So in summary, these are the 6 things I shared with you. I'm going to finish now, Jenny, but just quickly, with regard to any kind of credentials, including micro, be clear about where you want to play and why, and measure your success accordingly. And success doesn't always have to be money and revenue, of course, important as that may be. It's also about community good, engagement, benefit, and making Australia a better place for everyone. Maximize the benefits most valued by the learner at that point in the life, and moderate costs as much as you can for that learner, because then you'll heighten the value. agree on what we agree on are the important things about micro-credentials and proceed. Don't get in a knot about how we define them. I think we're pretty close. Think creatively about how to credential in partnership with industry. And remember, any kind of credential is a means to an end. Find out what your learners want and offer them pathways. Give them a map. I'll go back to Coursera just quickly. So Coursera, if you look at that platform, has gone from being a MOOC platform that offers courses by high-flown universities to being a work platform. So now Coursera will say to you, so you're a marketing person, you're a junior marketing person. To become a senior one, do this little course and then do that job for a while. To move from that to becoming a chief marketing officer, do this small or large course. So it actually plots the path. I think that's what we need, is more paths, maps, and then find out where paid work will be, more prolific, safe and secure, and educate your learners towards those opportunities. Back your credentials with transparent data. Finally, professional development in any industry is ripe for credentialing. Think about credentialing your own staff, because we all do PD for staff. Why not turn that into some kind of verified, certified certificate that people can take with them when they either stay with you or leave you? I think it's important for the sector right now. So Jenny, I'm done. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. No one told me I went too long, so I hope that's okay. And I'm happy to converse or let you move on.
Thank you very much, Bev. That was fabulous. Can people put their Q&As into the questions? And I'm sure Bev will be having a look at those questions while we now turn and hear from two of our TAFEs about what they're doing in terms of responding. So first off, we're going to have a presentation from TAFE New South Wales, and that will be followed with a presentation from TAFE Queensland. So let me introduce our presenters from TAFE New South Wales. Dr. Margot McNeil is Chief Product and Quality Officer at TAFE New South Wales, responsible for the large and diverse team leading the design, development and quality assurance of curriculum products for almost 500,000 students. Prior to this role, Margot has held a range of senior management positions and consultations in both higher education and vocational education. She has been in both the public and private sectors, and she is currently a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Margot's research interests and much of her strategic leadership explores technologies for learning, teaching and assessment and staff capability. Her educational leadership roles have included as a research member of Texas Academic Integrity Initiative, and those of you who were part of TAFE Talks 2 weeks ago would have heard Margot's name mentioned by our TEXA presenters. Margot will be joined by Dr. Suniti Rakari. Suniti has over 15 years experience in the Australian tertiary education sector, leading the development and implementation of innovation learning and teaching products at scales. She has a strong background in curriculum transformation, active technology enhanced learning and building teacher capability. In recognition of her global leadership in these fields, she is a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy. Suniti is currently Director of Product Operations Performance at TAFE New South Wales, where she is leading the complex strategic and operational product portfolio. Thank you, Margot and Suniti. Over to you.
Thanks, Jenny, and hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you. Suniti is going to be driving our slides, and really my role is almost just to introduce Suniti to speak. So my role, as Jenny was describing, is Chief Product and Quality Officer at TAFE New South Wales. And it feels as if micro-credentials have been part of so many of the conversations we've had, whether it's with our external partners and people across the sector, or our internal conversations for that matter. So I'm just going to briefly talk about a few things and put in a plug for some advocacy that you can play a role in, and then hand over to Suniti to talk about more detail about our development and our implementation of microcreds. So as Beverly and Jenny have mentioned, this is a piece that keeps coming up in a lot of conversations in the sector. And some of you may have seen Claire Field's piece that she was just writing, I think, a couple of days ago, on Lorna Unwin's keynote at the recent Congress on Research in Vocational Ed and Training and the kind of changing world of work that we're dealing with. So among other things, she reminds us that whatever work they're going to do, our graduates are going to need a combination of technical skills. So I am a chef, for example, and other skills. And that might start off being, I need to be able to influence my team members, but it might end up heading towards, I'm a manager, or I need to learn how to be a manager, which relates to Beverly's points before. And so those continually evolving needs, I think, are a really exciting opportunity for us. So with all this rapid pace of digitisation and the structural changes that go on in industry, and also the regulatory requirements. So for example, if you're involved in the building industry, there are new regulations that you're going to need to learn about. And they do drive that need for sort of genuine lifelong learning and reskilling and upskilling. So us at TAFE New South Wales, we really need to be part of that diversification so that we can include those on-demand, short and stackable pieces of learning that will complement our formal qualifications, but also provide some of the standalone bites that Bev mentioned. And that demand we know is huge and growing. People might have seen the NCBER's report that came out, I think, towards the end of last year. If I just use really round numbers, about half of the employers surveyed offered unaccredited training for their staff. And we can assume that micro-credentials must have been a big part of that, because it seems unlikely they're going to ask them to do a huge, long program of work if there's no credentialing offered for it. So if we're in credentialing institutions, then that provides either a great risk to our model or a great opportunity. And I guess we're considering it from the opportunity side. So we'll use these micro-credentials to increase access to education and the different types of learners we might engage, especially those ones that aren't just immediately out of school. However, for me, that really is only a part of the opportunity, because I think that a benefit in our TAFE context is that we can actually use these microcreds to enrich our own curriculum. Now, I know that can be quite a challenging concept in the highly, highly regulated vet context, but we still can craft our own curriculum, because that's the essence of how we deliver fantastic learning to our students. So we can bridge the gap between the components of the training packages and the emerging skills as they're racing towards us, the industries, and the participants in those industries that need to be upskilled. So this is, I think, how we can really equip our graduates for an exciting future, because we've given them some extra tools to take with them into their careers. So just quickly, before I hand over to Suniti to describe our approach in more detail, I'd like to put in a plug, as I mentioned earlier, for some advocacy in two areas. Firstly, working with the Commonwealth in the need for a clear policy roadmap on micro-credentials, including AQF alignment and the kind of funding frameworks, because these are big challenges if we think about the Gonski and Shergold vision and things like Institutes of Applied Technology. We're going to have to nail that complexity around things like AQF and funding before we can blur some of those boundaries between the sectors. And the second one is really around the accreditation platform, if you like. So at the moment, the micro-credential marketplace is delivered through UAC. And so far, those of us that have been involved in encouraging the inclusion of vet courses in that space, it's been a little bit slow, let's say. So I would say if there's some advocacy anyone on the call can do in those pieces, that's where we're going to be focusing our attention. So I'll hand over now to Suniti, who'll go into a bit more detail. And thanks again, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks so much, Margot. I'm going to take a little bit of a step back and start by asking the question around why micro-credentials. And we all know that accelerated digital adoption and industry changes are really driving the need for lifelong learning. Beverly spoke to us about this earlier, and she also spoke to us about the rate of change that's shortening the shelf life of formal qualifications. We know that there are new industries and new providers that are entering the market every day that increase access to education. Existing workers will require more quick and flexible forms of training to maintain industry currency. Employers are also willing to pay more for bespoke, on-the-job and just-in-time training, where skills can be immediately applied. And of course, technology and digital innovation are really driving the changed approaches to education delivery. So this is, sort of not, new to any of us. But what I'd like to say is that it almost creates a perfect storm for skilling through modular, bite-sized and stackable learning that can act as a value-add mechanism to TAFE New South Wales and really any education provider's course profile. And this is the scene or background that we agree we have to work in. And along with this background, at TAFE New South Wales, I just wanted to outline our three key aims. And our three key aims for why micro-credentialing revolve around ensuring that we provide quick, responsive and resilient services and products that remain in sync with emerging trends and technology changes, but also balance commercial acumen with our social responsibility as a government provider of choice. And that's really where, as Margot was mentioning, our opportunity lies. So keeping that in mind, what can our growth roadmap look like? The diagram here shows our phased approach for market growth, from prototyping to offering mature products as alternate credentials become more widely accepted. And I can give you some examples. So these credentials can include things like masterclasses, hands-on projects, seminars, micro courses and skills assessments, and certificates of prior learning. We can offer them as standalone programs or as credits towards formal qualifications, or as bundled offers aligned to professional outcomes. They can also, interestingly, integrate higher education and vocational education modules to offer hybrid credentials. But ultimately, as seen on the top half of this diagram, they can support what we were talking about in terms of that seamless and multi-directional pathways aligned to various stages of lifelong learning. Now, the lower part of this diagram shows our selected showcase of products that we've developed in the NNR, CPD, and microskill space. And I'll look at these examples in more detail a little bit later. But before doing that, I just wanted to outline our product development process. And the reason why I really wanted to talk about our product development process is because the success of TAFE New South Wales micro-credential program is anchored in an agile, collaborative and iterative design and development process with key phases and co-design opportunities with subject matter experts and clients throughout the process. And this not only manages client expectations, but it also ensures transparency and, ultimately no unexpected surprises at the end of the day. So the solution design includes things like upfront scoping of costs, development time, governance, roles and responsibilities, and support is offered throughout the life cycle of the product. And out-of-scope features are captured and put towards continuous improvement. So how do we use this design and development process? Here are just some examples of the products that we have developed with industry and government using that process. It includes our work with organisations such as Construct New South Wales, which, where we co-designed industry-provided training package for their new legislation and practice changes. And we really worked on them to ensure that what we were developing was in sync with real-time demand. And that's one of the opportunities we have with micro-credentials. They're really quick, they can be responsive to quick changes. Another example is the Women in Business program with over 100,000 enrollments. And this is a one-stop shop for information on starting, running and growing business enterprises. And I've outlined a few other examples here, but some of the key things that I wanted to outline from these examples is, as with all of our products, we have some key enablers that enhance our micro-credential offerings. And I just wanted to quickly go through what these key enablers were for us. And it should come as no surprise, it includes, front and center engaging and interactive learning experiences. We aim to provide choice to our learners and clients and really embed self-paced, just-in-time and personalized learning using media-rich, responsive elements that are really based on universal design standards. And we also have the ability to improve the product content using learner behavior and feedback through deeper analytics and insights, including individual learner dashboards and progress dashboards, and even progress trackers. We also use a simple and intuitive e-commerce platform, which is a bespoke and customizable learning platform that enables our clients to provide on-brand experiences and, sort of some key features that manages their training. Another key enabler that I wanted to talk to you about, and really it's a key differentiator for our future growth, is in utilizing immersive learning technologies such as virtual and augmented reality to create and complement our experiential learning, virtual trainer engagement, and even peer-to-peer social learning. So we successfully piloted a product with iCare where we saw a significant improvement in learning outcomes and teacher support through embedding VR technology into our training courses for them. Learners were very enthusiastic. Feedback from learners was that despite most of them being unfamiliar with VR technology at the start, they were quickly able to engage with it in a genuine way. And students shared that it made them reflect on the impact and consequences of unsafe work practice decisions, which made the learning very powerful. And moving forward, we're really keen to explore how this technology can impact learners' behaviours and ultimately their knowledge retention as well. So where to from here? For Star Trek fans out there, and I confess, I make a confession, I'm a big Trekkie, you'll recognise the Starship Enterprise. And maybe our aim is to boldly go where no person, or in this case, organisation, has gone before. So looping back to our initial thoughts and Beverly's introduction about enabling lifelong learning through micro-credentials, we now have the opportunity to ensure that we design, develop and deliver products that utilise lifelong learning and digital capability to grow and enhance our market. And we can do this by accelerating our responsiveness to enable commercial growth, targeting government and the large business sector. And we can also design pathway products that add value to our core business and provide those modular and stackable lifelong learning pathways. On the right hand of this slide, I've outlined some of the key areas that can play a significant role in VET growth. And the recurring theme, as you'll see, is co-creation with industry. And this is something that TAFE has always done well. It's not new for us. And we can really utilize our strength in practical experiential learning where industry connections are key and really use this to drive sector-wide change. So thank you everyone for listening to our brief outline of how TAFE New South Wales is working in the micro-credential space. Happy to stay connected and continue the conversation on this key area for the education sector. And please feel free to reach out to Margot or myself to continue the conversation even after this. And we're happy to share the slide deck with you. I'm conscious that there was a lot of information in there, so happy to provide the slide deck as well. Back to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Margot. Thank you, Suniti, and thank you for the offer to send out the slide deck. We normally do that after TAFE talks, so we will be sending those out with the permission of our presenters today. We get a lot of people who register who can't click in at the time, and we send it to those people as well. We're now going to turn to TAFE Queensland, and I'm delighted to introduce Joanne Pine, Chief Academic Officer. Jo has over 20 years' experience in government across a variety of senior roles. At TAFE Queensland, Jo has been instrumental in developing a range of programs that have received awards for their innovative approach and their responsiveness to business and community. Jo is passionate about ensuring TAFE Queensland is seen as the premier training provider, and Jo is an advocate of Indigenous vocational education in Queensland that students, employers, industry, and are proud to be associated with. Jo will be joined by TAFE Queensland Director Product Agency, Tracy Singh. Tracy has been with TAFE Queensland for over 10 years, primarily working in the product stakeholder engagement and commercial areas. Her present responsibilities include the design and development of product for commercial clients, with a particular focus on co-design of product with industry networks to provide targeted outcomes. Within the last 12 months, Tracy has been responsible for leading co-design of projects across diverse industries, including the resources, community services, and health sectors, and the development of product, including accredited courses, skill sets, and of course, micro-credentials. Thank you, Jo and Tracy.
Hi, thanks, Jenny. I'm just conscious of time as we move forward, and I'm going to go quite quickly through some of the areas that previous speakers have already talked about. We had intended to do a bit of a demo of one of our micro-credentials. Jenny, I'll leave that up to you, whether you think we've got time for that. And I'd just like to start off, I'm coming to you today from the Turrbal and Jagera country in Queensland, and proud to pay my respects to traditional owners. I'll just share with you a presentation, and as a few people have asked, this will be available after the session as well. Okay, I have just there. Great, thank you. went a bit quiet there. All right, you'll recognise some of the terminology we've used, the definition that Beverly suggested to the AQF review, and really looked at a piece of learning that's additional, alternate or complementary to our formal qualifications. Some of you have noted that, you know, we've been offering micro-credentials for a long time in vocational education and training. We call them competencies, and they're very much a part of how we deliver to our students and to our industry. I won't go through those definitions because we have talked about those already. In terms of, you know, when people started to talk about micro-credentials in TAFE Queensland, we sat down and we had a really long conversation about why we would go down this path. What problem were micro-credentials going to solve for us? Really, what we saw the value for us would be potential solutions to emerging skills. So where training packages weren't keeping pace with technology, and really looking at key skills areas such as digital, enterprise, and those technical skills. They provided us with some agility, so we could update and contextualise to suit the changing needs of particular clients. And they gave us a great deal of flexibility that sometimes is not available in our accredited training. So really, we started looking at skills not covered by national training packages and largely digital, and recognition of some soft skills or enterprise skills that we wanted to highlight a bit more directly. And I'll talk about some examples of those as we go through. As Aniti has said, one of the things that we discovered very well is fundamental to the work that we do is that we must be doing this with industry. We developed a few micro-credentials that we thought would be really attractive to the market, and they sort of did okay, but it's the programs where we work closely with industry, we identify with industry what their needs are, and we co-create with them. That's where we have our success. So going through, making sense of what they're saying to us, generating an idea, prototyping and testing those ideas. The structure that we've developed, largely we've looked at some essential micro-credentials that are largely quite small chunks of learning, and very much looking at general skills and very generic skills across industry, and largely about 2.5 hours, through to foundation skills around about 10 hours, and then looking through skilled, advanced and expert type of credentials. Now, one of the applications where we thought we would explore this is some work that Tracy did with BMA, which is an alliance between BHP and Mitsubishi Australia, looking at developing training for autonomous vehicles in central Queensland. Whilst we did do some entry-level micro-credentials, in the end, we also then developed some competencies, which we then registered with ASQA. And as Beverly highlighted at the beginning, you know, until we've really sorted out some funding mechanisms, that's really something that we will continue to do. I was really interested to see TAFE South Australia releasing some micro-credentials. Actually thought, I wish we'd thought of some of those. What they've done is really clever. You know, they're looking at things that are a pathway into some of their formal quals, and they're things that industry are looking for, but aren't covered in national training packages as well. So I think, you know, they've really looked at being very clever about the credentials that they're offering. So the future for us, we very much looking at our non-accredited but credentialated training, looking at technical skills and enterprise skills, a range of delivery modes, and digital badging. The range of delivery modes, particularly as we start looking at some of our longer and more developed skills programs, because, you know, online learning just needs to have a mix of modes if you're going to be looking at more lengthy programs. We worked, D2L provides our learning management system. Our micro-credentials are all delivered through D2L. And then we worked with Edelex and their Credentialate platform and Badger to be able to issue badges. We also issue certificates as well for our training. These are a set of 6 that Tracy worked with BMA to develop as part of the work she was doing with the Queensland Resources Council. Some of the other projects I might just flag that we've worked on, the autonomous mining operations I've already discussed. We worked with the Foundation for Young Australians and community services organisations in the southeast corner of Queensland to really look at, we were trying to close this gap between regional areas with huge amounts of youth unemployment and employers in these sectors saying they couldn't find skilled workers or couldn't find workers to train. So we worked with those to look at what are the missing elements. You know, people are obviously coming to you and applying for roles. What are the key skills they're missing? And we worked very closely with them and came up with a range of micro-credentials to plug those gaps. And so that their target for us were school students, people doing our own training, and people already working in that industry. That led on to some more work around with community services industry around developing some workforce fundamentals for the NDIS to explain the NDIS to people going into community services and looking at a basic orientation package. So again, very closely worked with industry to develop those. The other application that we had, we used micro-credentials for was during the pandemic. Government came to us and really wanted to be able to train up workers in personal services and hospitality to understand what the new rules were around businesses operating in a pandemic. So we worked very closely with D2L because the government had made a decision that every hospitality worker would have a week to get these badges to be able to operate in business. So we were looking at potentially a couple of 100,000 people wanting these micro-credentials in a very short period of time. So we needed to be able to make sure people would be able to enroll and get onto the system, do the training, and have the badge issued in a very simple way and without the system falling apart. So that we were very successful. We had, I think we've delivered now over 160,000 of those programs across the state, and working very closely with our Brightspace LMS on that one. So I'll stop sharing my screen now. Jenny, did you want us to look at a short overview of a micro-credential, or did you want to move straight on to questions?
Jo, I think given where we've landed, a short overview of a micro-credential will be great. And I assume Tracy's going to pick that up. And then I'm going to turn to Tony and Stephen and get their reflections and their short presentation. And while that's happening, I'm going to ask each of the presenters to look in the Q&A and pick out a question that they might like to answer, because the questions are quite varied, and we'll conclude with questions. So that's our structure for the last half hour. So Tracy, thank you. And I'll hand back to you, Jo and Tracy, to take the next step.
Thanks very much, Jenny. So I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. So I just wanted to give a bit of an overview of the Queensland Future Skills project. So it was actually a formal partnership between BHP Mitsubishi Alliance, TAFE Queensland and Central Queensland University. So I know we were having conversations about partnering with industry, but really from a TAFE Queensland perspective, what we're trying to do right now is do more formal partnerships rather than engage with them just as a, in a consultancy sort of way or as subject matter experts. So I will give you a bit of an overview of the micro-credentials that we've actually developed for this. I'm not going to walk you through the whole micro-credential, there's just a few pages, but I thought it was really important to share with the group the approach that TAFE Queensland takes to the design of micro-credentials. So micro-credentials are obviously all about flexibility, agility, accessibility, that type of thing. So they're short, sharp courses in a lot of cases. We do have a few different delivery models that we use. Some of them are online self-paced and some of them have actually got the workshop components or are a bit more, engaging on a face-to-face basis. So this is one that we did in autonomous environments in the value chain. What we try to do with this is we're very cognizant that a lot of people that are engaging with micro-credentials have various levels of digital literacy or exposure to online learning. So as Jo was saying, some of the first micro-credentials we did were for the Queensland Resources Council, where we were actually developing micro-credentials on a digital platform for people that didn't have strong digital literacy skills. So that's quite a challenge for us and really got us to really look into what design elements we needed to do and how we needed to simplify this. So this is a bit of an example of some of the interactions. We obviously use D2L as our learning management system, so a bit of a plug for D2L at the same time. But, it's just a great platform to make things really easy, to be able to just click on things, engage a little bit more with the interactivity without taking it too far, but allow people to actually explore some of the concepts. And some of these concepts, particularly in autonomous environments, can be quite challenging. We also have an ability to, to just let people have a look at the different sort of progression through some things as well. So, you know, we use those type of interactive elements, try to make it, you know, quite engaging, quite interactive, but give people the skills at the same time to really feel confident about navigating through these courses. So, for example, in a lot of micro-credentials, we wouldn't do a quiz, whereas if you only got 6 out of 10 answers right, we would take that to a stop. What we would do is actually provide you with some more information and let you actually progress through there, because we understand that the skills that we're developing and the outcomes that people are getting from micro-credentials are not just restricted to their topics that they're actually learning at the time. So these are just some of the things that we've done. As you can see, you know, most of them are pretty easy. You just click through them and everything. They are quite accessible. You know, the design is something that we really think about when we're developing micro-credentials as well as the learning outcomes and how we can get to that and how we can explain quite complex processes fairly simply as well. So I know we're a bit against the clock, Jenny, so I'm happy to wrap it up there and just answer any questions that people have.
Tracy, thank you very much. At this point in time, I'd like to thank all 5 of our speakers. Fabulous. And thank you to our 4 speakers from TAFE about giving some insights. I'm now going to introduce Tony Maguire and Stephen Atherton quite briefly and then hand across to them. And my brief introduction, as Tony is Regional Director of D2L and Stephen is Senior Account Executive, and both in the Australian New Zealand area, is the depth of experience they've had in learning. So Tony, for example, has created deep and lasting local international networks over his 25 years in the education technology space, always with a focus on collaboration and using learning to drive business transformation. He was the founder director of Agility Proprietary Limited, a strategic consulting company working in vocational and higher education. He has also previously supported TDA through briefings and activities. Stephen has been, dare I say, around for a long time, and he's predominantly focused on the professional development of teaching staff. He spent a year on staff at Bond University as Technology Enhanced Learning Officer before moving to a freelance EdTech consulting role with a focus on mobile learning, student response solutions and assessment tools. And he and Bev have known each other for some time. So Tony and Stephen, thank you. Thank you to DTL for your corporate affiliate, and thank you for joining us today with the depth of experience you've got, and we look forward to some reflections and a short presentation from you.
Very quick reflections, and for this I'll probably drive it, and Tony and I are quite happy to be on the panel for questions as well. So let me share my screen quite quickly and get the ball rolling. Assuming we can all...
It's probably worthwhile just reflecting on the fact we're both primary school teachers, so we started at the coalface.
Indeed we did. Indeed we did. Are we seeing my screen here? In which case I'll start.
We can't see your screen, Stephen.
There we go then. I'm guessing you can now. Okay, so thanks for that, and really enjoyed the presentations that we had. It was great to see TAFE New South Wales, who I hadn't seen in action. There's certainly true what we've heard that I saw in the conversations in my other screen, the phrase buzzword, and the fact that the concept has been around for a long time, whether it's our colleagues in Europe or our cousins across the ditch in New Zealand. It was good to see Bev present. She referred to her 29 paper. We heard that Bev's got a long experience in employability, graduate school skills, and so on. And assessment. In fact, I still cite one of the sayings that she had in a presentation some years ago when I say that feedback is like fish, best served fresh. So thank you for that, Bev, and of course it is accredited to you. The UNESCO paper, again, I saw debate about, the focus on definitions, and let's just move on, I think somebody inferred. Yeah, get that, but really the focus on granular certified learning is really important. These are not formal qualifications typically seen in the industry. It's really about this earning and learning connection. A degree is a macro credential, with an academic transcript. A micro-credential is a very different animal indeed. There are issues like portability I saw in some of the questions coming up. You'll see on the left there a paper from Universities Australia last year that came out about the same time as Bev's UNESCO paper. And that refers to things such as badging. Now, the only screenshot you'll see of Brightspace, you've already seen it in Queensland TAFE, shows badging, but it needs to dive deeper. And in fact, if we look at the underlying technology, that's where things get a little bit more complex, because these credentials have to be trusted. It's about trust. And you'll hear terms such as blockchain and verified credential models and so on out there. Bev spoke about education providing their employees with portable credentials. And I think that's a very valuable suggestion. It's interesting to note that there is a standard called HR Open that's out there for human resourcing that's all about credentialing people's employment records. One of the audience, Janelle, spoke about credentials as part of competency, and that's not a problem at all, but it brought up the issue of stackability and portability, meaning that South Bank TAFE's micro-credential should be recognised by, let's say, Holmes Glen and Melbourne. But it also means that there's a focus on learner agency, many in the industry ask. So there is no statement of attainment in some areas. Some universities, some industries are pushing for that. They're talking about the credential not living with the organisation, but with the individual. And this is why these technologies you heard from Joe, Badger Pro and Credential Aid, are important, the ability to trust. There are a number of folks doing a lot of work in that area, and I'm happy to share, if interested, a fireside chat I had with Professor Philip Long in the US. And indeed, Google him, just Philip Long and micro-credentials, and you'll see a talk he gave at EduCause a couple of years back. Happy to share with Jenny, however, the fireside chat I had with him. He's actually working on a project called the Silicon Valley Innovator Project that US Homeland Security is involved in, because they're also interested in supply chain credentials. So the push for standards under the WC3 organization is quite important. As you can see, under the hood, there's quite a lot of complexity there. When it comes to further and higher education, there's no doubt that there's a lot of research around micro-credentials. The Horizon report last year, for example, 79 people on that panel using a Delphi research methodology, universities ranging from Oxford to Algeria, industry members from Amazon to Microsoft looked at this. Now, micro-credentials was one of 6 educational technologies that was flagged last year: artificial intelligence, open education resources, and so on. Clearly, TAFE is a perfect fit for microcreds, folks like Phil Long will argue, because it's about skills transfer. A micro-credential, for example, in existentialist philosophy is unlikely to fly, whereas a microcred in ear health, as we heard from New South Wales, or construction New South Wales, is a perfect fit. No doubt, according to the Horizon report, micro-credentials are quite powerful. They got a score of 2.9 out of 4 for addressing equity and inclusion, and 3 for their outcome in learning. But there's room for improvement, worth noting, and certainly room for improvement in higher ed, more so than vocational ed. Now, Prof. Sankey was at Griffith and moved up to Charles Darwin, a dual sector university, so a TAFE wing as well. But interestingly, in his survey in 2020, he found that of the 33 Australian and New Zealand universities that were polled, only 32% had an improved matrix linking credentials to quality frameworks. Now, we heard from TAFE Queensland, and thanks Joe and Tracy, that they're doing a grand job there. In fact, unless I'm mistaken, Joe, you've had over the last 2 years more than 200,000 students go through various micro-credentials, not just the ones that were really amplified the interest from the state government revolving around COVID training. So really great work being done there. And as you said, certainly you and others in the vocational ed sector have mapped right through from AQF frameworks. And that's a great example for higher ed. Certainly they need to move in that direction as well. So some great work out there with some of our customers. Victoria University, also dual sector, so Victoria Polytech doing some great work. Now, Deakin hallmarks, which is their branding of their micro-credentials, is something that really grew out of Bev's foundation work when she was Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic, and has been continuing now with the current DVC, Liz Johnson. So in short, observing what I've seen here and looking at some of the questions, the fact that it is all about skills, TAFE is clearly the space to be watching, and that's what I'll be watching. So I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's get over to Q&A, Jenny. So I'll stop sharing at this stage.
Stephen, thank you very much. Tony, any last words from you? Or happy
Just
to
a couple
move?
of last ones. Yeah, thanks. I guess I'd like to thank TAFE for all of the learnings they've provided to us. If I was to take anything away from today, it's probably three things. First of all, learner agency is absolutely central to everything we do. It comes back to students. Again, comes back to, I guess, primary school days, because learner agency builds trust, and then it gives us a chance to think about expanding what we do in a more ubiquitous way. Once we have that ubiquity, and you think about it now, we register when we go in, and we have check-ins all the time when we go into shops and a whole variety of things. So that checking in and that warranting of certain behaviours is becoming greater and greater. Phil Long talked about the biggest push for credentials in the US is going to be in the retail space, linking credentials to retail behaviours. So that ubiquity will come. I think the transparency and the recognition of the award and the warrant is really important, and that comes back to, I think, Bev's comment about value. And I remember sitting in a room with Bev some years ago, and she talked about where are my notes here. She talked about the authority and the value of the warrant being the thing that will drive so many behaviours. I guess the last comment I would make is that this session shows the dynamism that is happening within TAFE. It's appetite for innovation and real solutions to the economic engine problems that we see thrown up in the media so often. And I think TAFE has an absolutely critical role and an agility that universities will struggle with, their ability that, just as we've seen today, to work with groups like Foundation for Young Australians to focus in on those things that make societal difference and lift people out of circumstance. That, for me, is part of the real power here. So I'm just going to stop there. I won't talk about platforms and stuff, but for us, it's all about the people in the agency. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you, Stephen. I'm going to now pick up just very quickly the agility and industry little bit. I do think from a TAFE point of view, as one of our presenters said, working with industry is in our DNA. We've always done it. It's part of what we do, and it is actually what marks a vocational education and qualification. And it was very refreshing to see how that is now being flown out through these micro-credentials. I'm going to turn now to Bev and ask Bev if there's any question that's come through the Q&A, Bev, that you would like to address and provide a perspective on, or alternately, any other thoughts that you've come up with as you've listened to our other six speakers. Thanks, Bev.
Thanks, Jenny. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much. I didn't pick one. I'm sorry, I didn't obey the rules, Jenny. I didn't pick one question. I thought I'd go for a bit of a theme, if that's all right, because I saw there were comments about the micro-credential marketplace and the policy framework and funding. So I just want to address that. And that is, I'm not part of the work of the micro-credential marketplace. I just want to make it clear that Jenny and I were part of a working group that worked on a framework for micro-credentials. We did make it very clear to the department that the sector is waiting for this with bated breath, and we are still waiting for that work to be released. So that's all I'll say, but there's nothing more we can do about it, I'm sorry. But I believe there is a framework coming against which all providers will be able to assure themselves that they are meeting the standards required. I think, and I'm referring to themes in the questions now, the question about funding is absolutely essential. That was not part of our work, but it is the work that's required and the policy release from the government, because as we know, when funding is made available, learners respond. We've seen that free TAFE, we've seen it with undergraduate certificates and all sorts of other things. So that was my second comment. I want to also comment on Gerald Adams' comment that micro-credentials, we've always done this. I totally agree, Gerald. And I think it's also a buzzword, which I said at the beginning. The different thing now, though, is yes, we've always done it. And you could go and do a course at UWA summer school when I was there, and you could get a little certificate to say you'd done it. But up until recently, there was no connection between that certificate and any other degree that you might have done at that institution. And now there is a potential relationship between a micro that will lead you into a macro. And this is where the difference is. And I think it's a great thing that very large courses are potentially now being broken down into smaller bits that people feel they can do at various points of their life. So if it makes education more accessible, I think it's a great thing as long as the quality and standards are there. Finally, Jenny, don't forget the power of education for building and sustaining mental and social health and right across the lifespan. So what I didn't say during my presentation, but I will reiterate now, is if we can keep people, including older citizens, and we're very focused on them these days, we've seen awful things happen. If we can see people learning across the lifespan, truly post-career and into their old age, then we are likely to have a happier, healthier community. So we should be pitching to keep people engaged in that social engagement as well. So if a micro-credential will do it, I'm all for it. That's me.
Thanks, Bev. Maybe we need to look for some funding for that too, for those more mature members of our population. Something, I think you're right. I mean, we try and address it through other means, but maybe this is one pathway we haven't yet had a good look at. So thank you, Bev. Thanks for those insights. I'll now turn to either Margot or Suniti. Is there a question that either of you would like to highlight that's come through the Q&A?
Jenny, I can jump in if you like. I was looking through and there's a lot of great questions. So thanks to all the participants for posting them. I did look at one that's by Elaine. And so if I just read that question out, people are perhaps searching as well. And then just a couple of ideas that I might respond with. But the question was that given many of the advantages of microcreds and the cumbersome, in brackets, dated flaw that the vet system is structured around occupations that are rapidly changing and will do so even more, perhaps microcredentials might be the lever that will force rethinking and restructuring of the struggling Australian vet system. And what are our thoughts? I'm sure there are other people on the panel who do have thoughts in this space, but it does take me back to my comments earlier about our opportunities for advocacy. So, for example, we've all just been slammed with the number of transitioning training packages that are coming out of the skills service organisations. And next year, we're going to have the new industry clusters. So I would say this is the kind of opportunity that if we play our advocacy cards, particularly a group like TAFE Directors Association and the other players who have a very close relationship with various industries, then we might be able to recraft it. So if we move our thinking from a micro-credential to being almost like a unit of competency that's part of a course, some people do talk about it that way, but I would say it can almost be when we're developing or reviewing a training package, what are going to be the things we need really early as like the front runners that will help people who are already in industry. So I think about an example like cybersecurity. So there'd be hundreds of businesses that would actually want their employees to understand a bit more about cybersecurity, so that they don't get sucked into using their credit card to buy something for the boss. You know, you will have heard of those sorts of things. But if we work with industry to develop that kind of micro skill, then we should be building that back into our curriculum. And it could be looped into the training package as well, because it will be a really valuable skill for all of our graduates, not just the people that are already out working. So I think it's that creativity around what role we play rather than just recipients. And I'm just sort of speaking bluntly, but if we're advocates in that space, we might be able to drive some of that different type of thinking so that it can be meeting those emerging needs as well as the ones that have taken a couple of years to craft. So I'll stop there.
Margot, thank you very much. And I think we have had members of the Digital Skills Organisation on today, and I'm sure they're listening with great intent. Joe and Tracy, any specific question that you'd like to address in the last 5 minutes that we've got?
Like Bev, I'd like to address a range of questions and really refer back to something I didn't probably emphasise enough in our presentation. You know, a lot of people have talked about the fact that we do small bits of learning really well now. We've been doing short courses for a very long time. We've connected with industry to do it. And I think micro-credentials give us an opportunity to take it to that next step. One of the things, we operate in a marketplace in Queensland. We've got more private providers than you can poke a stick at. Our promise to the market and to students and employers is that we offer a quality product. What we really made sure we were doing with micro-credentials is offering a badging system that allowed people to go back and have a look at what the skills were that the people developed, what the assessment looked like, so they could be guaranteed what sort of learning that person had during their training. So I think this is a real opportunity for us. We are at the quality end of the market, and we can use micro-credentials to really manage the short courses we offer to reassure industry that quality is there, because there are so many courses out there where you don't know what you're getting for your money. An employer doesn't know what that means. We really, in TAFE Queensland, spend a lot of time making sure that our quality would be consistent and that employers and students could look back and see where that sat in the AQF level and what it actually, you know, meant to have that badge or that credential.
Thank you, Joe. I think we've now reached the end of our session today. I'll just hand across very, very briefly to Stephen or Tony if there's any additional comments or question that either of you saw that you would like to flag. Tony, you're on mute.
Just one from Elaine Butler there, where she described the marketplace as being a bit of the Wild West, and I think we remember back to the days of 2015, 2016. I think there's an opportunity for TAFE to really broadly bring that policy strategy discussion forward, but also to make sure that the warrants that you do bring forward, that credentialing is so clearly understood as the benchmark. And I think that's really an opportunity here to kind of make that Wild West go away a little bit.
Fantastic. I'd like to really thank all our speakers today. To Beverly Oliver, thank you so much, Beverly, for giving us so much of your time today, for stimulating through your opening speech with some really principles, really, for us to have a think about as we go on and develop. To our two speakers from TAFE New South Wales and our two speakers from TAFE Queensland, thank you for the insights that you provided into the work that you're leading as such significant players in this system. And to DTL2L, we acknowledge and look forward to continuing to work with you as a corporate affiliate with TAFE Directors Australia. To all the audience, thank you for your questions. We look forward to continuing this conversation during 2022 at further sessions. Thank you everyone for sticking with us today, and have a great afternoon or the rest of the morning for those of you in the West. Bye for now.